Senate Republican Caucus leader David Hann joins me now to give his perspective on the Senate DFL budget targets and the governor's as well. Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I want to begin with the philosophy thus far. When the governor released his modified budget plan, was the mantra coming from the GOP was this is a tax and spend budget. Would you concur? Is it still your philosophy with the Senate plan as well?
Well, I think so. It's hard to justify when you have a $627 million problem and say the solution is $2 billion in taxes to solve that problem. It seems to me that there has been an ideology or a philosophy that says we need to raise taxes because it's the right thing to do, and then once we do it, then we'll figure out how to spend the money. It's pretty clear to us that the plans that are being proposed are not being driven by the economic demands of a budget problem, and they're certainly not being driven by the idea that we need to get the economy moving. There has yet to be any answer to the question of how do these increases in taxes help grow the economy. But that's the central thing that we're concerned about.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to say, but they are driven by the philosophy that they want to invest more. So do you need additional revenue to have these kind of investments in education, in economic development?
Well, I think they're using the word invest as another word for spend. They want to spend more, that's clear, but it's not clear that what they're spending on is actually going to accomplish any greater purpose. We think that we need to spend money. Obviously, that's what government does, but you need to spend it wisely. You need to make sure that you're accomplishing a set agreed upon goal. And just to say that we're going to spend more money, that doesn't accomplish anything necessarily. We think you need to do a better job of outlining what reforms you're going to bring to the spending. We know we have to do this differently. We just can't afford to keep spending money the same old way.
Senate Majority Leader Tom Bach said the other key was really to help reduce property taxes, and that was something conveyed by Commissioner Franz as well. Do you think that these budgets do that?
Well, I think the governor had a proposal to buy off property taxes at the state level, even though they're all raised at the local level. He called that reform, even though it did nothing to reform the formulas or nothing to reform the function of the property taxes, and then he withdrew it. I understand that the Senate Democrats have proposed a shifting of some of the property taxes to the state level. We saw that happen in 2001, I believe, and has happened before. These things do nothing to reform property taxes. All it does is shift who pays the cost. That is not reform. In fact, I think it does harm because it distances the people who are actually paying the money from where the decisions get made. That does not do us any good.
At first blush, are there any provisions in the Senate's plan that you would support?
Well, of course, we haven't seen the details. The bills haven't been introduced. We've seen the targets. And so at this point, I would say there's not much in there that we find much encouragement for. We don't think they need to raise the $2 billion in taxes. We don't think they need to have the money set aside to finance a large bonding bill, which they have in here. We don't think they need to shift the local government or the local property taxes to the state level. We don't think that's necessary. So the things about it that I've seen to us just don't make any sense.
And the governor dropped his idea of the business-to-business sales tax and the internet sales tax. That does remain. They shifted the internet sales tax into another area. But in your opinion, are there maybe some provisions that have been overlooked by the media in the last week concerning the governor's plan that you think that deserve attention?
Well, there hasn't been a whole lot of talk about the snowbird tax, for example, which I think is a peculiar idea, but I think it's something that should be talked about. I don't know if any other state does this. I think it's a damaging idea, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about it. There hasn't been a lot of money associated with it. Certainly no reform to the corporate tax structure that the governor originally talked about. There has been very little talked about that he's sort of withdrawn that as well. I think the Senate Democrats have not completely retreated from the idea of doing sales taxes. They've kind of left that open. They haven't given us any details. I'm not sure that we won't see some of the taxes that the governor has taken off the table come back in the Senate Democrat plan. So we'll have to wait and see.
You've stated previously that your caucus will, of course, come to the table and offer up suggestions and solutions. So what are some of those suggestions and solutions at this time that you would offer given the opportunity?
Well, we'd say, number one, live within the means that the economy has provided. We are going to see a significant increase in revenue just from the performance of the economy. We should use that money, and we should try to hold ourselves to spend within that limit. Then we should work harder at setting priorities and trying to do what we need to do in ways that accomplish the goals that we need to accomplish and bring about reform that is going to be structural reform. A lot of the credit that the governor took for his budget was due to the reforms that we put in place in our budget 2 years ago. And we think that's great. We did that. We're going to agree. The governor signed the bill, so we can take credit for that together. But we need to do more of that. And so we would suggest that the Senate Democrats and the House Democrats work with us to help do more of that.
I'd like to ask you, as former chair of the Senate HHS committee, the Senate plan does have $153 million in actual base cuts to the HHS budget. So do you support this? And do you think there's room, knowing you know the budget better than most?
Right, and again, if I were a Democrat, I'd say, well, they're cutting the budget, which in their language, that's what it is. It is going to be an increase in spending because the base, which is the forecast, does call for an increase in spending from where we are today. So we have the budget today, then we have a forecast, which is called the base, which is an increase, and then we have the Democrats' budget. And Democrats' budget calls for about $158 million less than the base, but it's still more than the current budget. So it's an increase from the current budget. It's less than what the forecast calls for.
So it's a bit disingenuous the way they're provided.
We've said for years that when they call things cuts, what they're really talking is a reduction from a projected increase in spending. So to use their language, it's a cut. All I would say is that they have proposed a reduction in the increase in spending. I don't know what they proposed precisely, but we'll take a look at it.
And you already stated what you would say if brought to the table. Do you think you'll be invited to the table?
Well, they've talked a lot in the past about the need to be bipartisan, and they want to work together, and they said the election this last year was about bipartisanship and working together. We didn't see a lot of that in the health care exchange bill, so we're always hopeful, and we hope they'll bring us to the table on the budget.
Republican Senate Caucus Leader, we appreciate it. David Hann, thanks for joining us.